Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Shri Zahir. I'm Dean of the University of Minnesota's Carlson School of Management. Welcome to this December edition of First Tuesday. And whether it's December or June, we always have a number of important partners to thank. To start with, of course, Wells Fargo for being our presenting sponsor, D'Amico Catering, Twin Cities Business, the event's promotional partner and media sponsor, and of course, McNamara Alumni Center. In addition, thanks to our new sponsor, Carlson School Executive Education, which offers business leaders short, transformational career development courses and custom solutions for your organizations that blend both our university's expertise and the expertise of Fortune 500 companies in our neighborhood. So how about a hand for all of our sponsors? Next, I'd like to extend a welcome to some very special guests who are here today. President Eric Kaler, Regent Abdul Omari. Is Regent Omari here today? Maybe he's on his way, or maybe he's busy with, other activities. Regent Richard Beeson, and Carlson School Board of Overseers Chair, Bob Kippers. Thank you for joining us. Lastly, I do want to say thank you to each and every one of you who've supported the Carlson School of Management and the University of Minnesota this year. We're extremely proud to be considered one of the top business schools in the world, and that's only made possible with the support of people like you. And now, I'd like to introduce our speaker for today, Scott Wine. Scott is the CEO and chairman of Polaris Industries, which is a $6 billion market leader in power sports that produces off-road vehicles, snowmobiles, motorcycles, boats, and on-road electric and hybrid-powered vehicles. Scott joined the company in 2008 after serving as president of Fire Safety Americas, which is a division of United Technologies. Prior to that, he held senior leadership positions at Danaher Corporation, serving as president of its Jacob Vehicle Systems and Veeder-Root subsidiaries. He also held various international and domestic posts with Honeywell's aerospace division. Scott received an economics degree from the U.S. Naval Academy in 1989 and served as a naval supply officer until 1996. I'm not surprised that he's a strong supporter of our Veterans Initiative. He holds an MBA from another U of M, this one the University of Maryland at College Park, and he serves on the boards of Polaris, US Bank Corp, and Terex Corporation. It's now my great pleasure to begin this afternoon's presentation by giving you Scott Wine.
Thank you, Dr. Shri, Dr. Kaler, for being here, and thank to all of you for coming out. It's not quite as snowy as we would like it at Polaris, but nonetheless, it's getting a little bit colder, so we like that. It was about 5 years ago that I gave the first Tuesday speech, and at that point, I'd been at Polaris half of the tenure that I've got now, and it almost seemed like we couldn't do anything wrong. Fast forward the next 5 years, it's almost like we couldn't do anything right. But what I want to talk about this morning is how over a course of a 65-year very rich history, a bunch of leaders and a bunch of really hard workers and critical thinkers across Polaris have been really good at managing risk. And when we think about risk, there's a whole lot of different ways to think about it. Dr. Kaler, I'm sure you could describe a whole bunch of risks that you've dealt with during your tenure, and we all see it. There's major, major risks that go on that we see in the news. This is very, very recent. You've talked about fires and hurricanes and stock market crashes. There's all kinds of risks. But what I'm going to talk about today is a little bit more Polaris-based. And talk about how, first of all, we have to acknowledge risk. It's really important that we understand the markets that we serve in, the competitors that we're up against. We first have to acknowledge it. And then we work really, really hard to manage it. So once you understand it and acknowledge it, we really spend time trying to manage risk. But that in and of itself is not nearly good enough. So what I'm going to spend most of the time talking about is how we leverage risk. How we leverage all of the different forces that come in to make our jobs a little more daunting and make Polaris a better company, and how we've done that for 65 years and how we plan to do that well into the future. If you think about the nature of our industry, it's kind of risk is inherent. I was really appreciative of Levi LaValle representing Polaris for the Super Bowl events last year, and this wonderful backflip, downtown Minneapolis. How many people saw that? That was pretty cool. And then the most online hits we'd had ever was Travis Pastrana recreating Evel Knievel's jumps. That was pretty cool. And then we happened to have this flat track racer that wins almost everything. And if you haven't ever been to an event that will really excite you, come out to flat track racing sometime. But these aren't real risk because these are professional athletes. They know exactly what we're doing. The real risk we have with our customers, it's the guys that, and I hate to admit I'm in this category sometimes, it's the hold my beer and watch this crowd. We have a few of those. But like I said, we will celebrate next year. 2019 will be our 65th anniversary. And over the course of that time, and what I'll talk about next is what our founders faced when they started the company. But really, we have just made an industry out of mastering risk. And I'm not, the word mastering is on there for a reason, because we by no means master risk. In fact, you can look at all the things that we screw up and see pretty clearly that we don't. But we are in the process, and have been for 65 years, of mastering risk, of being able to acknowledge it, manage it, and then leverage it. Our history is pretty rich. I love this chart because it really talks about how hard the work has been done over the years to accomplish the thing. The foundation that built this company that started it in 1954, it took them 41 years to get our first billion in sales. And then a little faster, 16 years to get the second billion. And since then, we've actually grown and hit the billion-dollar marks with buying companies, introducing new products, creating brands that are $1 billion. And, unless we really screw up the month of December, we'll surpass $6 billion for the first time in our history. And it's, I will tell you, as a 10-year employee, it's a really fun ride. I always tell people when we hire people, the one thing I warn them is that everybody works really, really hard. And when I talked to them 6 months later, they said, "Hey, Scott, I know that you said that, but I didn't believe it, but it's true." Even our, we've got a couple of development program folks here, right? Are you working hard? Okay, thank you. Good answer. But the risk that was taken that started the company was in Roseau. So Roseau is maybe 10 miles south of the Canadian border. I always tell people that aren't from Minnesota, if you look at the national weather map in the wintertime, almost always International Falls is the coldest place in the continental United States. Roseau is 50 miles north of International Falls. So we're way up there. But Edgar and Alan Hatteen and David Johnson had this idea that they were going to make farm implements. They were a farm implement shop. Hoist and what they decided to do is that they would love to ice fish, and so they would traipse through the woods on their snowshoes and go up to Lake of the Woods and ice fish. And they had this idea, and they literally strapped together a couple bumpers, put a seat on it and a motor, and off they went with the first snow. We didn't invent the snowmobile, we invented the snowmobile industry. And when I was talking to the Veterans Organization, I did the research a little bit more, and David Johnson served in the United States Navy. He was actually in China, and he sent half of his paycheck, so he risked his own wealth to send back to Edgar Hatteen to keep this machine shop running. That's what got the company started. But it wasn't enough just to make a snowmobile. Edgar had this great idea. Talk about risk. There wasn't a snowmobile industry. There was a couple of machines that you could use in the snow, but there was no industry. He put basically all the money they had, he put a snowmobile on a plane, flies up to Alaska, and takes a snowmobile 1,000 miles across the Alaskan tundra. Time magazine, it was truly an awakening for the industry. And he took a major risk doing that, but more of a risk than he realized, because he came back, the board wasn't very happy with him, he didn't like being chastised, so he quit and started Arctic Cat. Little history for you if you didn't know that. But it was that early risk, that willingness to take a chance, to work really, really hard to overcome, that got the company started. And that has served us well for a long, long time. But there was 100 snowmobile manufacturers for a while. And Textron actually bought Polaris. And they hired a guy named Hall Wendell, and Hall was working his way up, and they let him run this Polaris product line that they had. But the industries were awful, and Textron wanted to get out of it. So Hall took a risk, and I mean a big risk. These guys leveraged everything they had. They leveraged their mortgages, every bit of savings, every family member they could get to give them the money. And they bought Polaris. It was a $39 million company, and they bought it from Textron. 3 years later, they paid it off. They owned the company outright. And Hall, talk about taking risks. This is what a great story about Hall. While he was the CEO he was CEO for 17 years, while he was the CEO, he hiked Mount Everest twice, made it the second time. He climbed the other 7 highest peaks. He managed risk really well. I like to think about Hall, how in the world, they said he was a bit of a tyrant. I know him well, so I can see that. But this was before cell phones and before computers to email, but he held people accountable. He made sure that they were managing risk while he was gone to get the company started. So we have a rich history of people taking risks and making them pay off. And if you think about the world we live in at Polaris, there's a lot of external risk. Is it going to snow? Is there too much rain? Is the government going to get involved? The tariffs, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, really, really impactful. Lots and lots of external risks. I could talk about legal risks all day long if I wanted to, but economic risks. I mean, I'm certainly worried about the economy tipping over. Not sure that it will, but we have to think about what do we do if that happens. And then our internal risks aren't really risks because we're constantly trying to mitigate them. In fact, if we manage these things right, they're more of a competitive advantage than they are risks. But we've got to get our product design right so we can have a competitive advantage in the industry. We risk losing market share if we don't do it right. Our engineering, we've got to make sure that we engineer our products so they're durable and they're reliable, if they're also exciting for our customers to buy them. Our supply chain is incredibly complex and difficult to manage. We've got a lot of risk that our suppliers are going to shut down our line and not allow us to satisfy customers. And ultimately, managing quality throughout the system is a constant risk that we're mitigating throughout the company. And I'll talk about personnel risk in a little bit. So, obviously, one of the major risks we had was this recalls. And it was, the impact, it was a gut punch, to be honest. What we had to work through to recall over 500,000 vehicles, 50 separate recalls, tremendous cost for warranty, legal, the cost and a lot of times what we were managing is some vehicle melting, smoke coming out. It wasn't the risk of a fire, but it was more risk than we were prepared to deal with. It really shook our company to the core. But we're still the market leader in power sports by a long shot. We're still driving significant growth in our core RZR business that had the predominant impact here. How did that happen? Because we managed that significant risk. One of our core values is safety and ethics always. We only have 3 guiding principles. Best people, best team, safety and ethics always, and customer loyalty. We really looked at ourselves when we started having these recall issues and says, does this safety and ethics always, is that really what we're doing? And we recommitted to make sure that everything we were doing in the company reflected that. And I will tell you, from hiring Todd Gross, who's now our quality leader, to building a much better safety surveillance organization. We have a better culture. Our data, our process, our tools are significantly better. I mean, it's really impressive to see how the team reacted and made the company better for it. And ultimately, we've still got the tails of that to deal with, but I feel really good about how we've ultimately dealt with that risk and ultimately made it a competitive advantage for us going forward. Our products will prove that. So if you think about the market risks, there are really three primary market risks that we deal with. There's the competitive risk. Somebody's going to launch a great new product. Honda, everybody's heard of Honda. They just launched they said they're going to launch in April a new competitive sport rec vehicle for us. We have Japanese competitors. We have Chinese competitors. We have European competitors. It's a very, very competitive industry. And economic risks. I mean, we're constantly worried about currencies. A currency swing in a year can cost us $70 million of operating profit. That was 2015. The currencies rate, that's one of the interest rates are a risk to us. Lots of economic risk that we have to manage. And then geographic risk. We're predominantly, 85% of our sales are in North America. But if we want to have long-term growth, we've got to have products that we can sell in what I'll call the Southern Hemisphere. So that geographic risk is something we've got to constantly manage. Here's a great example of what happens when you don't manage that geographic risk right. So how many of you do a little bit of business in India? Dr. Sri raised her hand, of course. It's hard. It's hard. So we went into India and we had a great partner, a wonderful partner. And we worked really hard. We were literally months and months in I'll call the hinterlands of India, seeing how people were doing their work, making sure that we designed the right product. There's always a risk of a Western company going into India and over-engineering something. Isn't that so I thought our partner would help us not do that. We finally launched this vehicle. We built a factory, we launched the vehicle, and we thought it was going to be a home run. Multics was the name of this vehicle. So we struggled a little bit getting distribution set up. We struggled a little bit. The product wasn't exactly right. It was a little too expensive. And then all of a sudden, the government decided to change the regulation. And we would have had to, so we were already losing money. We would have had to completely redesign and re-engineer the product. So we'd spent $50 on the plant, and we would have had to go on and spend another $20 and had no idea or confidence that we would have an opportunity. So we wrote that off. That was expensive. But there's 1.3 billion people in India. We've got to find a way to make that work. There's also 1.3 billion people in China. Actually, almost 1.4 now. But there's a lot of people there, and we've taken a different approach. Rather than build a plant, and the big difference, and Dr. Sri and I were talking about it at lunch, is there's a much larger middle or higher income class in China. So there's a lot of people that can buy our products there. So they're 40% more expensive because of the Chinese tariffs than they are here. But we've actually had a fast growing. We've got 6 Indian motorcycle dealerships there. We basically can't ship them enough products, even with that 40% higher cost that they're paying. So China is a different approach and a much better success. 2 geographies with similar opportunities for us. One worked, one didn't. We'll learn from that, manage that risk better going forward. So personnel risk, this could also be called hiring risks. And if you're the CEO of a company, when you make hiring mistakes, it can be really expensive. It also can cause people to leave. People don't like to work for a boss that's not good. And then results aren't very good. If I hire the wrong person, there's no way they're going to get good results, no matter how good the team below them is. And then the reputation of the company is at hurt. But also, it puts my personal reputation. One of the most eye-opening dinners I've had in my tenure at Polaris was I'd been there about a year. We'd hired a new person, and I won't say the role. And the plant manager, we're having dinner, and we're talking about how things were going. And he looked me in the eye, and he said, "Scott, I thought you could hire someone better for this role." Think about that. It was him very politely, the Minnesota nice way of telling me I was an idiot. And the truth be told, I was. And if I hadn't made a change, I was going to lose a bunch of my best plant managers. And we did that change, and it was awesome. So I've got to be really careful about what we do when we're hiring, because that's a big risk. So we have a very extensive interview process, multi-level, rigorous process feedback loop. For our entire senior executive team, they have to go through an industrial psychologist who's been working for us for maybe, I don't know, I've known him for over a decade. So he knows me, he knows Polaris, and he knows what it takes for somebody to be successful here. And he'll give us a recommendation. We don't always rely on it, but he's usually right. We do extensive background checks. We check references. We go through a lot of work, but we still make mistakes sometimes. I still make mistakes sometimes. But when we get this right, and most of the time we do, I'm extremely proud of Jim Williams and our HR team for helping us build an incredibly talented team. And I could go through the entire team and give great examples, but I'll just pick one, Steve Eastman. So Steve left Target a little bit unceremoniously with some of he had run their electronics business, he'd run Target.com, and I just happened to meet him, and he happened to be available, and he was offered CEO jobs to everybody who wanted to stay in Minnesota. So he took a risk with us, and we took a risk with him. And at that time, Polaris's aftermarket business, our parts, garments, and accessories, was about $400 million. Anybody want to guess what Steve's done in 8 years? That's not bad. Talk about what happens when you manage that hiring risk the right way. And one of the sayings that Jim always reminds me is that A's beget A's. If you hire A players, they bring in A-level talent. Steve's really done that. He's gotten all these results, but he's built the team to help us achieve this. Why have we built such a large aftermarket business? Because when the market turns down, people buy less vehicles, but they still ride. They still need parts. They still need accessories. This is really helpful to us. It helps us offset that economic risk. You read about Tesla and all their success, and I'm going to say success in quotes because when you lose that much money consistently, it's not really success. You don't cover your cost of capital. I have a fundamental problem with that. But there's a lot of talk about it. But technology, whether you do it or not, is a risk. So we decided, you know what, we've got to play there. So we invested in a company called Bramo. We ended up buying their motorcycle business because they couldn't run and they were spending too much money, and we thought we could. Those aren't hundreds of thousands. That's the number of electric motorcycles we sold. I'm glad you think it's funny. So we finally shut down the Bramo motorcycle business, and we thought it was a good idea. And now our leading competitor in motorcycles just launched this bike on the right. I'm not going to say who it is, and I'm not going to give them credit for putting their logo on it. But I will tell you, it's a darn good bike. It looks nice. They had their launch. They wouldn't start it. You couldn't sit on it. They wouldn't tell you how much it was going to cost, and they wouldn't tell you when it was going to be available. Sometimes it's better to let other people take the risk. That's what we're going to do with electric. Now, we're working on it. We're going to make sure that when the market needs it from us, we'll have it available. But when it comes to motorcycles, electric probably isn't the way to go. So product development risk. We're constantly taking product development risk. We'll spend a little over $260 million on product development and research and development this year. It's a big part of our business, and generally we get it right. So in my tenure, I've learned three things. If you're going to buy a successful business in our industry, or launch a successful product, you've got to have three things. And if you don't have three, you better have two that are really darn good. First, you've got to have a good brand. Second, you've got to have a great product. We generally get that right. And then you've got to make sure you get distribution. I think too often in business, we forget how important distribution is. When you're an OEM, you rely on distribution partners, but you don't control those partners. So you've got to build the relationships and trust to make sure that works. So those three things, by and large, you get them right, you're good. You don't, you're in trouble. So how do we do? We bought a little company called General Electric Motor Cars from Chrysler in 2010. We thought we knew everything. We're Polaris, we can make that better. The brand was good. We screwed up the product, and we screwed up the distribution. The question mark is on there because I honestly don't know right now what the end is going to be. We still manufacture gems. We still sell gems. In fact, we've got a great little business going on it. But we've been at it for 7 years, and it hasn't been successful. We need to do a better job of managing that risk. Victory Motorcycles, we started it for almost 20 years ago. We were in it for 18 years. The cumulative losses were, the official language is well over $100 million. I will tell you it was much closer to $200 million we lost on that business. I call it the School of Hard Knocks because if we hadn't launched Victory, we would never have been successful with Indian. So we get Indian, you see we got everything. We got the product right, we got the brand right, we got the distribution right, and it's been really good for us. In 5 years, we've created a $500 million business. Now the path from here is making sure we have a profitable, very profitable business before we get to $1 billion, so that's the challenge. Our Climb business, it was an acquisition, but again, they got all three right. Slingshot, we're not sure about. Great product, but not as good as it could or should be. Just another look at Indian. When we first launched that product at Sturgis in 2013, we weren't sure how it was going to go. But we've had the right partners. We've taken risk with flat track racing. This is kind of a fun story. So our key competitor out of Milwaukee sponsors flat track racing in the United States. So every week, the winner's circle, if you will, has a backdrop with their name all over it. Every week, we take first, second, and usually third of every race. So it's kind of nice to see that. But they took a risk on sponsoring the series. We took a risk on investing to make sure we win races. We've got the bikes, we've got the people, and it's been fun. And the opportunity for that business continues to grow. So we think about geographic risk. We're not big enough in Europe, and Europe is a larger and growing faster motorcycle business than the United States. We don't always think about that. So we launched this FTR 1200, which was built off of the success in flat track racing, thus FTR, get it? But it's a great opportunity for us to sell more bikes in international markets. It takes the brand in a different place. It's a risk that we took that we think is going to pay off pretty significantly. Here's one. Our Ranger business is pretty darn successful right now. In fact, it's the largest single product line we have in Polaris. Hardest working, smoothest riding. It is a great, great vehicle. And everybody just assumes it was always good. A lot of people ask me, Slingshot's not going so well. Why don't you shut it down? And we look back at our history and said, we don't always get things right. We take risk with product development, and sometimes we iterate quickly and make them better. It's kind of what we did with Ranger. John Deere had the Gator first, so we came out with the Ranger. And it wasn't all that good. The product wasn't great. We didn't have the distribution for it because we weren't nationwide. It was mostly a snowmobile company at the time. So we weren't very good. So we kept working at it and working at it. We built new products. Pretty cool, last year we shipped our 1 millionth Ranger. And for our 20th anniversary, we launched, I'll say it's the best vehicle we've ever built. When we start putting HVAC in a utility vehicle, we've come pretty far. So I could talk about lawyers and I could talk about regulators almost all day if I wanted to. But I'll just tell a story about our success. Our Ranger business was almost done because we were deep in discussions with a regulator, the Consumer Product Safety Commission, I have deep respect for, but they also, I mean, it's difficult. The task that they've got is to regulate cribs and dressers and bicycles and turbocharged vehicles. It's difficult for them. So they were worried about, I'll show you a picture of the Yamaha Rhino, which had a bit of a problem. It tipped over too often. So they wanted to regulate stability. And their idea of regulating stability is they would just take this Ranger we had, shrink it down, widen it out, and our business would have been gone. So the way we overcame that risk is we took our best engineers and we showed them how their engineering was wrong. That what they were asking us to do really wouldn't make it safer, it would just destroy an industry and a utility vehicle that many people enjoy. We had to work hard to get through that risk. So this is Yamaha Rhino. We never had there was no such thing as the Polaris RZR. The first sport wreck vehicle in the market. They were doing really, really well, but they tipped over too often. So the CPSC got on them. So we decided, you know what, we're going to try this a different way. And we came out with the RZR. 10 years later, it's a $1 billion business for us. Even though this is where a lot of our recalls happen, we are still larger than the next 3 competitors combined. And I will tell you, it is the most fun vehicle. Well, I personally think RMKs, the mountain snowmobiles, are the most fun, but this is right there. Yeah, the Indian motorcycles are pretty good too. Anyway, RZR's, it's a great, great product. So just a couple of thoughts. It is really risky when you blindly take a risk. You lack the critical thinking, you're not really seeing it. You cannot blindly take risk, or you put your organization, whether it's your sports team, your university, your business, at risk. But you also can't be a risk. Being afraid of risk can paralyze an organization, and it can be devastating. You also can't ignore it. If you pretend that risks don't exist, you're certainly going to have problems. So you got to accept it, and then you got to deal with it, or embrace it. So we talk about is we like to think we take wise risks. So what does wise risks mean? We deeply understand our customers, our markets, our competitors. It's kind of funny. Every time one of our competitors launch a vehicle, it's guaranteed they're going to sell at least one because we're going to buy the first one if we can. We always buy them. We want to see what they're doing differently. What's the risk that's happening with that product? There's a risk-return trade-off. Anybody that thinks that not always, but usually the more risk you take, the better opportunity is there to get a reward, whether it's market share, profit, something on the other side of it. You've got to manage those risk-reward trade-offs. We've got to learn from our mistakes. I talked about our recalls. We learned a lot from it. We are a better company. Our products are better for it. And hire critical thinkers, and I'm going to talk about that. That's really, really important. Knowledge and experience. You can't hire a bunch of new people. I love the Carlson School. We hire a lot, and they're great employees. But we've also got to have people that have been there for 25 years. They've seen things happen. They know just because of experience. That combination is what makes the difference. We've also got to accept failure. It was a big debate with my lawyer about do we accept failure or do we celebrate failure? I will tell you sometimes we celebrate failure because we want to make sure if we don't ever take risks, we're never going to have failures. But the key is we've got to learn from them. So when I talk about critical thinking, it's not just about hiring lawyers or hiring smart people. It's making sure that we don't do some things. And I will tell you that these are on the list because at Polaris we have been guilty of some of these things. Sometimes we hope. I am convinced that hope is not a strategy. But sometimes we do hope things are going to work out. You know, we've had really good success with some of our products, but does past success guarantee success in the future? Probably not. I think there's real power in being optimistic, but it can't be blind. You've got to really think through critically what is the future likely to hold. But I see what I see a lot of from our best employees. They challenge the status quo. They take disparate ideas in different parts of the company, something they've seen, they put it together and help us overcome a risk and do something better. A lot of times critical thinking is just about having guts. A lot of the decisions that we make everybody agrees with. But there's the critical few that aren't popular. Nobody really wants to do it because it's hard. Nobody's sure it's going to pay off because it hasn't before. But sometimes as leaders, we've got to make those decisions. Proposing new solutions. It takes courage to propose a new solution. But a lot of times you've got to take that risk of proposing something new if you want something better. And then ultimately, there is this, it's not blind optimism, but it's just the courage that we can figure stuff out. We have a lot of employees. We have 13,000 employees at Polaris. There is a whole lot of them that just know they're going to be able to find and figure a thing out. That's really encouraging for us. So here's some people that didn't think critically as well as they could have. So did anybody know that Kodak actually developed the technology for the first digital camera? They also had technology that could have evolved into the smartphone, but they were scared to introduce it because they wanted to protect what they had. They wouldn't take the risk because they wanted. Blockbuster, man, they had a great run. For those of us that are my age, that was where you got movies from. They had a chance to partner with Netflix. Probably should have done that. And I don't know about you all, I loved my Nokia phone. It was fantastic. I thought it was the best thing ever. Anybody got, raise your hand if you've got a Nokia phone. Still. They had well over 50% market share of phone market, and now they are almost done. So we've got to do better than that. So we sell vehicles. That's what we do. We're in the vehicle selling business. So why on earth would we get into a business where you can spend $300 and have the vehicle all weekend? That's what we do. Polaris Adventures now operates almost 125,000 people have used Polaris Adventures. They've gone online, scheduled a ride. We took care of the liability insurance, made that easy for them. Our operators like the product because they're always having new ones because we manage the lease program. We took that risk because we're willing to disrupt our own industry. We don't know how far it's going to go, but we think that if there's 5 million people that buy Polaris products today, shouldn't there be 50 million that will participate if we make it easier for them? That's what we're trying to do. We take risks with technologies. You know, we were the first in the industry to put the technology in for buddy tracking in your vehicle. The first to regulate, not quite infinite, but how many times a second this is managing your suspension in your vehicle to make sure you land perfectly off a jump. That's a technology risk we took. Autonomous. Our industry is built because people like to have fun riding, but not the military. They don't want to put their soldiers at risk. So we've created an autonomous solution for them. Grandparents, you buy a Ranger 170 and you put a geofencing around it on your phone and you restrict where your grandchildren can go. Those are the ways we're taking risk with technology that we think will pay off in the long term. Some of the risks we don't take. Some of the risks are forced on us. Tariffs, to say that it's cost us $2 billion in market cap. When we first acknowledged our tariff risk, our financials have been fine throughout the year, exactly where we said they'd be, but we acknowledged the financial risk of tariffs. We've lost $2 billion of market cap. But we didn't just sit back and say, what's going to happen to us? We have been actively managing it. We've been lobbying. We've had employee communications sent. We've had our dealers send information. Actually, my favorite was Senator Klobuchar, who's been quite helpful. I went to Washington. I met personally with President Trump. I met personally with Vice President Pence. I talked to 8 Republican senators. I give a lot of money to the Republican Party. The Star Tribune will tell you that. That was a joke. So I met with all of these people. And I've worked with Amy quite a bit. Who is the one person? So our whole goal of our lobbying effort is to reach Ambassador Lighthizer, because he's the one that runs USTR, to get him to give us an exemption. That was the goal. And just countless hours, all this work. I get a call from Amy. Everybody's trying to figure out how they're going to do this. They're going to write a letter. Amy called up Ambassador Lighthizer and said, I've got this constituent in Minnesota. you need my vote for USMCA, you better find a way to help them. That is what I call advocacy, helping us manage a risk. So we've got a lot of work to overcome it, but I'm confident that at the end we will. So just structure. You can't talk about risk in a corporation today and not acknowledge exactly how we're doing it. I'm on the board of US Bank, and we spend a lot of time managing risk, and they're quite good at it. We're not quite as good at Polaris, but we're darn good. Our audit committee does a lot to manage risk. We have internal auditors and external auditors. We have a compliance department. We do a whole lot of stuff structurally to manage it. We've got enterprise risk management, so we think real critically about what the most impactful risks are going to be. You know, we go through budget, everything that everybody does. We've got processes to manage risk. But we don't always get it right. But when we do, we tend to make a lot of money. And one of the things that I want to end with is what happens when a corporation like Polaris has been willing to take risks, a lot of risk over time, and get rewarded for it. We pay a lot of dividends. We got 24 years now, dividends, yep. So we're going to be, they call it a dividend aristocrat when you've increased your dividend for 25 years. We'll be 25 next year. So we give money back to shareholders, but we also give back to the communities. In the last 5 years, over $20 million into the communities where we operate. That's a lot of money. But really, if you think about it on a larger scale, this idea of free markets, nobody's talking positively about capitalism anymore. I will. I truly believe in free markets. And if you think about this risk-adjusted return that we get for making these risks in business, how good can it be? Let's take a quick look. I love Arthur Brooks. He is a passionate free market ambassador. And he talks about the poverty rate. So why am I ending a speech talking about poverty? Because it's a wonderful story. In the 50 years that I've been alive, the poverty rate, the people that survived on less than $1 a day, has gone down by 80%. How many people see that talked about in the news? You don't realize that. Look at it in a different way. It used to be 1 in 4 people lived in poverty, severe poverty around the world. What is it today? It's 1 in 20. So if you hear Arthur Brooks tell this speech, he does it pretty well. It wasn't the United Nations. It wasn't a big federal program. It wasn't food stamps. What happened? What happened here? We taught the world how to operate in free markets. People saw we exported this idea that you can be entrepreneurial and get paid for it, that you can take a risk and be rewarded for it. And it's happened, and it's lifted a lot of people around the world out of poverty. And I think that gives us confidence that taking risks, acknowledging and managing and then leveraging it is the right thing for us to do at Polaris. So if you think about the greatest risk, it just might be not taking risks. And I will tell you that there's a lot of times I'll sit in the office and think about the risks, and if I'm afraid to take risks, it's time for Polaris to get a new CEO. I'm not done yet. So thank you. Yep. So now I've opened it up for questions. I start with the hard ones and then work our way to the easy ones would be best.
Thank you very much, Scott. My name is Mark Hughes, and that's what's not important. But what is important is that your comments, the risk of hiring, and saying you need young employees, but you need the 25-year veterans around. We believe that in our company, too. But what I was wondering is, my feelings are if you're not living, you're not learning. If you're not learning, you're not living. And by sitting on the boards of U.S. Bank and the other boards that you do, is there a practice that they do that you might bring back to the office to bring into Polaris to make it even a stronger hiring policy?
That's a very good question, and I will tell you that it is an honor and a privilege and a responsibility to be on the U.S. Bank board and the Terex board. But if I didn't feel like I was getting something valuable for Polaris, I wouldn't do it. So it is a little bit selfish. And I will tell you that at U.S. Bank, understanding how they manage risk was incredibly helpful to me. Now, they were forced to go too far because of the regulators, and they've done it extremely well. So that was very helpful. At Terex, we do a lot of things better than they do, but they had an activist shareholder come in. And we actually invited him to come on the board rather than fight him. And he brought an idea around strategic sourcing that I watched play out at Terex, and now we're deeply into the same thing right now. So if we do it right, and I'm confident our team will, we're going to save well over $200 million. So yeah, there's some benefit from it. Yes, sir.
Thanks for coming today. Could you talk about your new pontoon business?
The pontoon business. We bought Boat Holdings, which includes Bennington Pontoons. Now, if you remember, do you remember the three things that it takes to be successful in our industry? Product, brand, distribution. We got the premium pontoon business, both the product and the distribution and the brand in the industry. Now, we also got 3 other brands that don't fit quite that category, but pontoons are interesting. Very innovation-driven business. Very responsive. They're lean manufacturing, so they turn working capital. Their returns on invested capital were over 100% before we bought them. So it's a very good company. We see it an opportunity. Really, the thought process is we got great brands, great product, great distribution at a reasonable price. But most importantly, we're the global leader in power sports. 70% of the world is covered in water, and we don't have a product to go on water. So that was kind of the thought process.
This is K. Kesina, and I'm the chair of the Supply Chain Operations Group. This is the Polaris groups with the Masters in Supply Chain. One of the things, it's very inspiring to listen to what you've said. I saw supply chain as mentioned as part of your managing risk. What can we do for you? How can we help to train the next generation of leaders, be it for Polaris, to do what you just said ought to be done?
You know, we are, this strategic sourcing initiative that we're going through right now is putting a tremendous burden on our talent. It's straining our talent because it's hard work. It's very resource intensive. We think so much today is, oh, it's advanced technology, it's a new app, it's a new tool or something. This is literally standard work and training. Right, Chai, it's what it is, right? It's standard work and training. So if we can just have people that come in, they're willing to work really, really hard and learn this process, I think we could set these younger people coming in, actually at any age, we could set them up to have a wonderful career because they'll know the best supply chain in operation, not just what you've trained them in school, but in practice. So we would send them our way.
We have time for one more question.
She's coming.
Thank you. So in terms of managing risk, today, in today's environment, especially manufacturing, you mentioned lean manufacturing for Pennington, digital is a big play, and leveraging data across the supply chain, manufacturing. Just curious how digital strategy fits into risk management for your organization.
It's a great question. So it fits in almost every way because on the operations side, what we're doing digitally to understand how our products are being produced, that digital twin, if you will, if something's going through manufacturing, can we manage it through life? But really the bigger risk with digital is what we're doing strategically as an offensive tool. I mean, I talked about Polaris Adventures, but really there's probably a world where you could think about subscription being important to us. There's probably a world where you don't have to. How many people own a Polaris? Anybody, besides the Polaris folks, who owns a Polaris vehicle in Connecticut? Right. How easy is it to put it on a trailer and take to your dealer for the service? But what if you could do that on your app? Have somebody come to your house and have it all taken care of. We've got a really good relationship with Deloitte. They're helping us think through what the future could be. But we think if we don't get digital right, we don't win in the future. Thank you.
Scott, thank you very much. I think we have a lot to think about risk and how to leverage it as we leave this talk. And before you all leave, please note that next month, first Tuesday takes a break. So there's no first Tuesday in January. But to make up, we have a double header in February. We'll have Kate Mortensen, who's president and CEO of the 2019 Minneapolis Final Four Committee, as well as Mike Happy, CEO of Winnebago, speaking in February. So we will be starting a little earlier than we normally do. So we'll be starting the luncheon at 11:30 instead of noon. We'll still strive to end by 1 o'clock. So please make sure you come here and enjoy this wonderful doubleheader. As you know, the Final Four is coming to Minneapolis in March, so that'll be a very exciting thing, and we'd also love to hear from Winnebago. So, and until then, I wish you all happy holidays. I hope you have some quiet time and some downtime and some time for enjoyment this coming month. Thank you.